He carefully folded a paper flower. Though it lacked the fragrance of a real flower, it could withstand the harsh sun of the Wild West. Here, only lifeless things can endure. His mother praised him for being skillful and clever, wanting to take the paper flower to decorate their family's restaurant. But before opening, he went to his father's grave, replaced the withered branches and leaves in the glass jar, and placed a bunch of artificial flowers that could stand firm through wind and snow. He always remembered his father's words. Dad hoped he would be kind, and kindness meant clearing obstacles for those he loved. Turning around, he saw a pair of cowboys about to enter his mother's restaurant. Leading them was Phil, the rancher, tall and rugged, standing atop a fine horse, like the finest cowboy from ancient times. He looked so brawny that people often forgot his aristocratic background. As soon as Phil walked in, he was drawn to the paper flower on the table. The diners in the restaurant always talked loudly, disrupting Phil's sense of order and etiquette. Phil fought back his disgust, tearing at the delicate, beautiful petals. Only this paper flower stood apart from the wilderness. He guessed it was made by a pretty young lady, but Peter shattered that illusion. Peter told him his mother used to run a flower shop, and that he'd made the flower himself. Phil didn't hold back his praise, telling Peter the flowers looked almost real, but things weren't that simple. The boy was as fragile as a flower, with an extremely thin frame and a pale complexion that made it obvious he could never ride a wild horse. Phil lost interest in the flower at once. He lit it on fire right in front of Peter, his eyes filled with contempt and amusement, a look Peter knew well, meant to call him effeminate. He hid back in the kitchen, continuing his long-standing little habit, running his hand repeatedly over the teeth of the comb. His mother, hearing the cowboy's vulgar remarks and unable to bear her son being insulted, cleared all the paper flowers off the table. As soon as the paper flowers were gone, the entire restaurant fell back into barbarism. The noisy crowd choked Phil. He stood up and shouted, "If you don't quiet down, I'll not be polite." The restaurant fell silent instantly. Peter ran outside to spin a hula hoop. Even in exercise, he chose a flexible, graceful way destined never to be as violent as Phil. Yet the tug-of-war between the flower folder and the flower destroyer had begun from the moment they met. In the end, only George, Phil's brother, remained in the restaurant. He heard suppressed sobs from the kitchen. It was Peter's mother, Rose, grieving. George went in to comfort her. Rose tried to apologize for Phil's rudeness but was too tongue-tied to speak, so he just patted her shoulder. George and Phil were two completely different brothers. George bathed once a week, never making a sound, always quiet and dignified. Phil, on the other hand, never touched a bathtub, bathed only once a month, and never joined the cowboys in the water. Instead, he avoided the crowd and went to his secret spot. He refused to be vulnerable with others, yet loved curling up in bed with George. They'd never been apart, not since they were children. Phil adored his brother George, but his words were always sharp. That day marked their 25th anniversary of herding cattle. Phil, who valued rituals, reminded George several times, but George paid no mind. Phil angrily asked, 25 years ago, there was a foolish fatso who couldn't get into college. Someone helped us. Without that, we wouldn't be where we are today. George said it was Bronco Henry who'd helped them. George hated the term foolish fatso, hated Phil always bringing up his expulsion from school, and hated even more that Phil kept mentioning Bronco Henry. It made Phil seem like a weirdo stuck in the past. But George never rebelled. Phil was a graduate of a top university, a standout in the crowd, able to command the cowboys with a word. Rose became George's escape, a way to break free from Phil's shadow. George drove dozens of miles over mountain roads every day just to see Rose, and even helped her wait on customers in the restaurant. He wasn't good with words, but Rose saw his kindness and reliability in his actions. George came home later and later. Phil could only lie in bed, plucking gently at his banjo. The only bad thing about the wild world was that when you were alone, the moonlight on the horizon could easily drive you mad. Phil stared at the distant mountains for longer and longer, as if something there was calling to him. The cowboys wondered what he saw in those mountains, asking if others could see it if George could. Phil said no one could. When his companions pressed, "What do you see?" "Then," he replied, "if you can't see it, there's nothing to see." George couldn't see his soul, but he still had to hold on to him. Phil wrote to their parents far away, complaining that Rose was a widow with a slow son, begging them to stop George from pursuing her. He also crafted a small toy to cheer George up, but George already knew about his behind-the-scenes tricks. George told him he'd married Rose the week before. Phil went to the stable and beat his beloved horse for the first time, shouting obscenities all aimed at that woman named Rose. He loathed Rose, even her name. To Phil, Rose's existence meant the end of the world. On Rose's wedding day, Peter plucked a few petals from the bouquet to keep safe. Rose thought her son's behavior wasn't manly enough, but didn't dare say more. Peter was to move to the ranch with George, but he felt only relief finally. He could pursue his own life. He started boarding school, determined to become a doctor like his father. But when his mother came to pick him up for summer vacation after one semester, everything had changed. Peter arrived at the ranch dressed neatly and cleanly. Phil saw him from a distance and mocked. "Well, if it isn't Miss Nancy." Meeting Peter let Phil's cruelty shine. Every time Peter went outside, Phil's dogs pestered him. Watching Peter flounder, Phil decided to let him off the hook, whistling to call the hounds away. Peter thought Phil might have a shred of kindness, but then Phil ordered some cowboys to chase him on horseback, scaring him into running for his life. But Peter was no weakling. He made elaborate hunting traps and soon caught a small rabbit, hoping to cheer his mother up. But he acutely noticed the scent of her perfume was tinged with the burn of whiskey. His mother fumbled, revealing a liquor bottle. Knowing she was trying to hide it, Peter helped tuck it back. Rose had alcohol everywhere, sneaking sips no matter the occasion. Alcohol left her spirit increasingly listless, yet she couldn't break the dependency. When her body couldn't metabolize the alcohol fast enough, Rose developed headaches. She couldn't tell if the headaches caused the drinking or the drinking caused the headaches, only that it was worse than childbirth. Childbirth's pain had an end. Headaches were endless to spare. As for who'd turned his mother into this, Peter had his suspicions. He asked Rose, "It's because of Phil, isn't it?" Rose said, "He's just an ordinary man." It was so easy to crush a soul. Phil didn't even have to do much, just look down on her. On Rose's first day at the ranch, Phil sat in a chair reading the newspaper all day. Rose tried to strike up a conversation, greeting him gently, but he replied, "I don't associate with people who have agendas." That night, George locked his bedroom door. Even though George was quiet, Phil heard a silent tsunami, drowning him outside the world. Realizing he'd been abandoned by George, Phil could only go to the stable, scrubbing his saddle over and over. Engraved on the plaque was Bronco Henry, his mentor, the man who'd made him a cowboy. Dead for 21 years, the living might betray him, but the dead never would. After marrying, Rose's days felt empty, like she was just an extra mouth to feed, wasting food. She even fought with the servants for kitchen work, just to prove she was useful. George bought her an expensive piano, encouraging her to practice so she could perform when they invited their parents and the governor over. Rose gladly agreed. Phil started his mischief. While Rose practiced piano, Phil played his banjo. He'd never studied music theory, yet had perfect pitch like Mozart. Every note Rose played, he echoed instantly, flawlessly and better than her. His talent made her efforts look laughable. Worse was the anguish of being scorned, as if she were born inferior. Rose gave up practicing, staring at the wind-swept wilderness. It wasn't barren, so why couldn't it grow a civilized heart like Phil's? George tried to stand up for her. At first, Phil teased, "Rose's piano playing is grating," but when he saw George's unease, he couldn't bear his brother's discomfort. Finally, Phil spoke up. "What do you want, George?" George said it was about the governor's wife, stammering until Phil snapped, "Spit it out." George mustered the courage. "She might mind you eating at the table without washing up." George wanted to gently persuade Phil not to attend the dinner, but Phil just stared at him. In the end, George fled. Guilty people are like rabbits, retreating as fast as they can. Phil didn't attend the dinner. Rose ruined it herself. She was also bad with words. Unable to seem interesting quickly, the governor kept mentioning Phil, a Yale graduate. Even Rose had to admit, Phil was annoying, but charismatic. When it was time to play the piano, she froze. Thinking of Phil's disdainful eyes, she apologized sincerely, saying she couldn't play a single note. After the dinner, Phil arrived, whistling loudly. To Phil, Rose was uselessly pretty and soft, something he could ignore, until those qualities drew George. Then, indifference turned to hostility. Rose knew she'd lost. Downing a glass of wine in one gulp, that was when her drinking began. Phil hated drunks most of all. They were usually rambling fools. You shouldn't get drunk when you drink. Drunks should be thrown out of taverns. That was one of Phil's strange rules. When Peter came to the ranch, he realized Peter was also beyond his control. Peter rarely called her mom, using Rose instead. The rabbit Peter had caught to cheer her up, he dissected it moments later, with such skill that even the maid was shocked. Rose thought she should talk to Peter, but he brushed her off. What good is a man who always listens to his mother? The powerlessness she'd felt with Phil, she felt again with Peter, but Peter had unspoken words he hadn't told Rose. His only wish was for his mother to be happy. What kind of man would he be if he didn't save her? Using mind games to crush people wasn't Peter's style. First, he chose to stare at Phil. Phil had lean, powerful hands easily castrating 1,500 cattle, with only a nick on his pinky to show for it. What's more, Phil never wore gloves while working. He thought gloves felt unnatural, unmanly. So people always wondered, had a lonely man like Phil ever known love? The answer was usually no. Love is soft, and Phil even loathed soft gloves. Peter found Phil's secret spot with ease. Inside, he dug up magazines filled with men and the name Bronco Henry. Phil pulled out a silk handkerchief he'd cherished for years, gently wiping his body. Then he lay flat under the harsh sun, letting the wind sweep over him. The handkerchief, like a large hand, brushed softly against his cheek. Everyone said he, a top student, should step into the great world beyond the wilderness. But he never saw this place as one of despair or defeat. Bronco Henry's handkerchief was here, so this place was unbreakable. But when he turned, he saw Peter. That weirdo was spying on him. For a split second, Phil wanted to tear him to pieces. He roared insults and chased Peter away. After this near exposure of his true self, Phil's hatred for Peter burned hotter. Yet that day, Peter, wearing soft, fragile white shoes, wove through a group of cowboys. They called him a little freak and Miss Nancy, whistling lewdly. But Peter didn't run. He tuned out all the cruelty, focusing only on his destination, a large tree, where he stood studying a bird's nest intently. This act made Phil think more highly of him. A perfect plan formed in Phil's head. He'd steal Peter away from Rose. If that loathsome woman lost her son, she'd drown herself in alcohol, ruining her life for good. And he was sure a young, naive boy couldn't resist bonding with a man like him. So he called out to Peter, "You wanted me, Mr. Burbank?" Peter asked. "There's no Mr. Burbank here. I'm Phil," he said. "Yes, Mr. Burbank," Peter replied, still using the title. Phil sighed. "I suppose it's hard for a kid to call an old man like me Phil." He paused. "Still, Peter, we got off to a rocky start." Peter feigned confusion. "Did we, sir?" This small exchange smoothed things over exactly what Phil wanted. The thought of that woman fuming made Phil grin. He even promised to make Peter a leather rope before he went back to school. That day, Phil summoned Peter, put him on Bronco Henry's saddle, and ordered him to swap his white shoes for boots. Phil clearly wanted to reform him, stop his mother from turning him effeminate. But this boy, scorned by Phil, easily uncovered a secret Phil held dear. Peter pointed to the distant mountains. They looked like a biting dog. The mountain shadows did resemble a running hound, chasing its prey. Phil had finally found a kindred spirit. He just wasn't sure if Peter, like him, harbored desires too fragile for the West. Rose watched them grow closer, powerless to intervene. She grew more anxious, begging for a heart-to-heart. But Peter shut her out. His overly sentimental mother unnerved him. He fidgeted with a comb in his hand. "Stop that clicking," Rose pleaded. "It sends chills down my spine." He paused, but when she asked, "What sounds make you tremble?" he started running the comb through his fingers again. Every jeer calling him effeminate choked him, but he'd never tell her. He didn't think a woman could understand. Rose rambled a few words before slipping into a drunken haze. Peter soothed her gently, but when she reached out to touch him, the intimacy made him recoil. He knew he had to speed up his plan. Phil's effort to tame Peter continued. After teaching him to ride, he set Peter loose in the wilderness. Believing a man must conquer fear, Peter fell, again and again, but Phil forced him up each time until he mastered riding. Galloping through the West, he pushed down his deepest fears, traversing every rugged trail, until a cow blocked his path. Rumors said local animals died from germs, so Peter put on gloves and carefully sliced off a piece of hide. His riding grew so skilled he joined Phil on expeditions. Phil, noticeably brighter, rambled freely about his beloved Bronco Henry. Peter listened quietly, lost in those old tales. Phil even wanted to teach him to hunt. A small rabbit became their target. Peter caught it first, though his leg was scraped. Phil's hand was cut by a branch, but before he could flinch, he watched Peter twist the rabbit's neck, ending its suffering swiftly. This boy, surprising them with his ruthless mercy, earned Phil's admiration once more. They opened up to each other. Peter answered every question, telling of his father who drank himself to death and how he'd cut the rope that choked him. Now it was Phil's turn to feel his heart race. Worried for the boy, he almost reached out to touch him. Rose's condition worsened. She hadn't been sober all summer. Failing as a wife, divorce loomed. She thought of quitting drinking, but with Phil stealing her son, she kept delaying it just one more day. A peddler came to buy hides. but the maid turned him away. Phil scorned merchants, preferring to burn the hides in piles. Hearing Phil had forbidden it, Rose chased the peddler. Her shoes slowed her, so she ran barefoot across the wilderness. Stones cut her feet, but they hurt less than a 10,000th of Phil's cruelty. Desperate for his approval, yet needing to defy him to feel like herself, she sold all his hides. With the money, she bought delicate gloves the kind Phil, even with bleeding hands, would never glance at. Soft, civilized things, vulnerable, separate from the wilderness. Rose touched all he loathed, completing her small but vital revenge. Then she collapsed, dizzy. George finally found her secret. He poured out the alcohol, blaming himself for noticing her sickness so late. Phil returned, roaring, "She's drunk, stinking drunk." "Rose isn't well," George said. "She's sick." Furious, Phil ranted, "It's time everyone knew that idiot's a drunk. She hides liquor everywhere, even drinks in stinking alleys. Look in the mirror, George. Does she love you, or your money?" Phil knew how to sting, but they were just cheap hides. George didn't get his rage, only Phil knew he hadn't finished Peter's rope. He wouldn't break that promise. Outside, Peter paced, anxious, until he made up his mind. He took off his gloves and gently grasped Phil's arm. Phil, unused to touch in years, froze. "I have hide for the rope," Peter said. Phil frowned. "How?" "I want to be like you," Peter said. "Take mine." The boy wanted to mimic him, to become him, to merge with him. Phil read the longing in him. His large hand brushed Peter's skin. Unbidden, he'd found his kindred spirit, someone scorned by the world, so they'd scorn it together. For the first time since Bronco Henry, Phil felt warmth. 1,000 words crowded his throat, but he only said, "May your future be kind." That night, Phil worked through darkness, twisting strips of hide to finish the rope. Peter stroked Bronco Henry's saddle. "How old were you when you knew him?" "Your age," Phil said. "He saved my life. We huddled together all night in the mountains, just bodies against the cold." "Naked?" Peter asked. Phil didn't answer. Maybe his smile held a flicker of pity. Peter rolled a cigarette with damp saliva, lit it, and pressed it to Phil's lips. Dim candlelight spun illusions. Peter's eyes glistened, as if with tears. The next day, Phil fell deathly ill. His strong body rarely ached. He couldn't fathom it. George wanted to take him to a doctor in town. Phil insisted on putting on a suit first. He always wanted to look dignified, but his weak steps betrayed his sickness. Dizzy, he stumbled to the stable, determined to give Peter the rope. It was the first time he felt out of control. As the rope slipped from his hand, a searing pain hit. He realized that soft, clean boy had killed him without a drop of blood. Peter paced his room, unsure if he feared Phil was too dead, or not dead enough. He was buried in that dignified black suit. Cause of death, anthrax. His eyes stayed open, as if blaming the boy warm to him, yet cold to the core. Phil's funeral was quiet, though he'd had his moments. His parents had always known, a freak like him was bound for a hard end. With Phil gone, his mother accepted Rose, giving her the ring that symbolized the family's honor. George sighed in relief. Phil's death grieved some, but let others breathe again. He'd left so suddenly. The only proof of his heart was his hunting dog, still pestering Peter as if asking why its master never came back. Peter went to his room, reading a morning poem. He turned to a verse, "Deliver my soul from the sword, my loved ones from the power of the dog." By now, it was clear who the real dog was. Peter used Phil's writing lessons to find the diseased cow, then used Phil's rope to kill it. He buried the rope in darkness. Outside, Rose and George returned, walking light, kissing happily in the dark. Peter, as his father had said, became a kind man, and kindness, he knew, meant clearing obstacles for those you loved. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.